I'm here with Bruce Pannier, a longtime journalist and senior correspondent covering Central Asia for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. He writes the Kishlok Ovozi blog and appears regularly on the Majlis podcast for RFE RL. They are both focused in more depth on Central Asia. If I mispronounced anything, please correct me.
Well, it was amazing. You even got the Uzbek words right. Congratulations.
Thank you. And firstly, I would want to ask you, how did you get all the way from United States to covering Central Asia in Prague, since it is a region that isn't much talked about in the Western world and media in general?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, I'll try to make this story as short as possible. When I was in college long ago and in Colorado, I was doing, I also did Russian studies and was learning Russian. For another reason, I wanted to take another language, but I thought Russian would be good to get my mind set for something a little tougher than English or Spanish. So at the time when I was about to finish college, Columbia University in New York City, and I'm wearing the sweatshirt actually, was offering scholarships to people for graduate school if they wanted to do Soviet economics or Central Asia, because no one was doing those things. So I fortunately picked Central Asia, since if I had picked Soviet economics, I probably would never have gotten a job. But so I picked Central Asia, and I got money to go to Columbia University and study Central Asia, and it was still the Soviet days, of course. So we didn't have so much material. I mean, today there's so much more material than there was then. But anyway, I was studying that, and I got to go to Tashkent State University in the summer of 1990. That's in Uzbekistan. It had been the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic. And then in 1992 and 3, there was a project with the University of Manchester and the Soros Foundation, and they were doing sociological research in a bunch of different countries, in regions, but one of the regions was Central Asia. So this teacher in Manchester found out that I was at Columbia University doing Central Asia, which hardly anyone did at the time, and asked me if I would go and live there in villages for at first 9 months, but I ended up staying on for 21 months. And help with the research there. He had local people doing teams of 2 that were out there with a list of questions they were asking people about. And so I went out between all these different groups in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, like I said, for 21 months. And about the time I was finishing my work on my dissertation, I came out to Prague. I'd finished with Central Asia. I'd gone back to New York, and a friend of mine was in Prague. So he said, don't sit out there in New York, come to Prague. This was 1994. He said, come to Prague, beer's really cheap. It's really nice place. You have a great time out here, and you can work on your dissertation while you're out here. So I came, and shortly after I got here, this organization called the Open Media Research Institute opened. They were funded partly by the Soros Foundation and partly by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And they were looking for someone who knew something about Central Asia. And of course, I had just left Central Asia 16 months before that, after living there for 21 months. So I got a job right away with them. They went out of business eventually because the radio I guess Soros didn't want to fund them. I can't remember who. But anyway, the Radio Free Europe took 8 people from the Open Media Research Institute, and I was one of them. And since then, I've been working in Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and going back to Central Asia whenever something big is happening, or sometimes just to go through the neighborhood and see how things are and how they're changing out there. And that's the short version of that story, I think.
So does it help you that you speak Russian for covering Central Asia? Since I noticed that you post or repost some Russian articles on your Twitter account, so I assume you speak quite well.
Oh yeah, I've been obviously when I had already been taking Russian when I was in college, and then I took more Russian language when I was at Columbia University, and then of course I was living out in these places. And sometimes I knew the local languages enough I could get by, and sometimes I didn't, and we would speak Russian. This is 1992 and 1993. So a lot of people still spoke Russian at that time. The Soviet Union had just fallen apart. So yeah, it helps because there's more there's much more information about Central Asia in Russian than any other language. Even if you know the local languages, it's confined to that one country. There's not that many media outlets. They don't report on, with the exception of maybe Kyrgyzstan. A lot of it is only state media, so it's not objective reporting a lot of times. Whereas Russia, since Central Asia was part of Russia for at least 150 years, depending on how you measure when they got there. There's just an abundance of information out there. More, like I said, more than any other language I can think of. You can find out about Central Asia if you know Russian. So that's the one I look at the most.
And now, if I can ask a few more questions about your profession as a journalist, because one of the things that I'm most worried about as a possible future journalist is the quick pace and sort of stress in the field. So does it have to be like this, and is it manageable, or how do you personally cope with it?
It's not. I think you can get into it pretty easily, no matter what. At the radio, I've done a bunch of different jobs. I mean, usually I write about Central Asia, but sometimes I would work on the news desk, and I'd write about any big event that was happening. So hopefully in one of the countries we cover. But anyway, even big what stuff that happened in the European Union, big events maybe in Northern Africa, all kinds of stuff like that. And then you have to write these 150-word reports really quick that they're going to translate and use on the radio for their broadcasts. So it can get hectic. But that said, it seemed like it's always not so difficult to adapt to the pace. And sometimes, like in my case anyway, you get lucky and you get to go out to places and spend a few weeks. I went to Kyrgyzstan in 2015 because they were having parliamentary elections, and I spent 18 days just driving all around the country and asking people what they knew about elections and did they plan to vote. And Kyrgyzstan, of course, is 90% mountains, so it was beautiful driving around. I covered 3,000 kilometers, went all over the country to talk to people, and that was, I would write every 2 days, sometimes every day, but it was a real relaxed atmosphere, and it was just based on what you saw. It was very easy to write about. All I had to do was remember what happened that day. So, I mean, you mentioned that obviously technology is getting better, so you have to tape people and get audio, and now it's better if you can get video somehow, and you have to cut that all up. But it's a lot of fun to know all these things, to get everything set up and sent off to Prague and see that your photos were used, and maybe your video was used, and your article was used, and so there's a feeling of satisfaction too. And there's a lot of times I thought I had so much to do I might not ever finish, but I always did. And that's a good feeling too, that when it's over and
And if you're not writing something really quick, like these really quick reports you were talking about, but it's like a medium-sized story per se, how long does that usually take you? Or it probably really depends whether you're asking Kyrgyz people from house to house, or when it's something research on the internet, but still, if you could sort of estimate.
Yeah, well, it's, obviously I've written some longer ones for the radio, and then remembering that there's supposed to be about 1,000 words if you can do it. But every now and then I've been able to do 2,500 or 3,000, and it takes, it takes a little while to look up more just of the details. I think with anyone who's been covering a specific area for a while, and I have been doing Central Asia for 35 years now, so I always remember. And I was out there too at the start. So I always remember things that happen. When I see something that happened, I can remember the history that goes around this. I have to look up the exact dates, and maybe find some quotes from somebody. I remember somebody in 1998 said something like this about it, and I have to go back and find out exactly what they said. But so it's obviously faster now than it was in the old days. When I started, then I would have to write about energy, right? Because there's a lot of oil and gas and things in Central Asia, and they sell it off and make a lot of money. And then you had to do a lot of research because obviously I didn't know that much about natural gas or oil or later uranium, and solar and wind power and things like that. But it was fun. I started doing that, and it took a while to get, at first you keep as close to the script, whatever you're reading, you can't copy that because that's plagiarism, but you try to figure out if you understand that and say it a different way, but as close to exactly what you see you know, as possible, so that you don't stray out and someone says this isn't what, that's not what is happening. That's not what that means. But then you get, after a while, same like anything else. After a while, you've been working at this and you're familiar with the terms and all the figures and things they provide, and then it becomes very, very easy to do it. And in fact, I even, to the point where I liked covering that better than most other topics, even though I hated it when I started. Because I didn't, 1,000,000,000 cubic meters of gas. How much is that? I don't know. Now I do. How many barrels of oil in a ton? I had no idea, until I started covering that. And then after a while, like you said, you just get it, and you can read 3 sentences and understand exactly what's going on, with that kind of in the energy business. So, but it took a while, like I said, just to learn the terminology, and I think it's like that with everything. No matter what topic, I always hoped that I would write about as many different things as possible, so I would know as much about as many different things as possible. And you end up, having to look into people's constitutions and go through that, or contracts that they've signed, or you know, things like that. And obviously, when you're unfamiliar with that, it takes a little patience and a little while to make sure you get everything right. But if you do it again a couple times, then, like I said, you get familiar with the topic, and it becomes much easier and real satisfying too, to that there's a small group of people who know about this stuff, and you're one of those small group of people that knows about it.
It's good to hear when you say that things get easier.
Yeah, they do.
But I suppose you had a head start as well, since you studied Central Asia in school, and then you traveled there. So that was something that might probably helped you when researching and stuff like that. Whereas if someone would, start writing about it with no background of knowing about the topic and stuff. What would you recommend to a future journalist to study or to get experience?
Well, as far as study, I suppose if you're going to be a journalist, ideally you want to get a job anyway. You'd want to be able to say you could cover as many, like I just said, as many different topics as possible. There are some people who go out and just cover war stories, right? And so I've never really understood those, having been in conflict areas before. I was glad when I left. But some people just cover that. If they're going to do that, then they probably don't need to know about world global economics, or a lot about the internet, past how to send off articles and things like that. But if like it said, was talking about working on the news desk, it's better, I think, anyway, if you know a lot of stuff, a wide variety of topics. You can always specialize in something later if there's something you really like, or something that your employer says, wow, you did a really good job with this or something. Then you can kind of focus in on just that one thing. So it's really important, I think, to know about as many topics as you can. And as far as writing, a lot of people offer opportunities to write for them. Unfortunately, not everyone pays, and I couldn't even tell you, maybe only half of them pay or something like that. But certainly at the start, it's really important to get stuff out there. So your name, it looks good on your CV. Your name is already out there, and you'll get feedback from people at the start too. Again, you were saying that I already knew the Central Asia, so it must have helped me when I started doing journalism. Yes and no, because I was used to writing academic articles, right? So when I started working at the news desk, for RFE, they were, like I said, they were working in stories that were 150 words or 1,000 words. And then, when you're coming out of grad school, you're like, how can you say anything? And it's impossible. 1,000 words is nothing. That's the introduction to what you're going to say, So they had to train me all the time and say, it can't be this long, because we were really radio when I started more than anything else. It had to be translated. You had to adjust your language. It was, if I was going to hand this over to people who spoke, Kyrgyz, Kazakh, Tajik, Turkmen, and Uzbek, if I used a lot of fancy words like I used at Columbia University, they'd be at the dictionary constantly. So I had to simplify what I said and make sure that it was very, very clear, so that no one could interpret it the wrong way. If you use clever words or something that in your own language, the nuance and then, like I said, they look it up in the dictionary. It has 7 different meanings, and they pick one, and it might not be the right one. So that, that was one of the, just an example. And I think, that applies to other ways. When you write, someone might say, this isn't how you write, this isn't how you do this. This isn't how you write this story, or you can't say this sentence, you can't say it this way. There's a lot of things you have to remember too when you're writing publicly, that you're under legal obligations too. There's slander laws, things like that too. So you sometimes, although you might want to write something that you feel very strongly about, you also have to remember that if you use certain language or accuse somebody of something without having any evidence to do it at all, you put your organization in trouble. And it gives you a bad name, So it is good that people at the start say you can't, don't do it like this, and help you out a little bit. So it's really the experience. I mean, it's frustrating sometimes because I wrote stuff that I thought was just perfect, when I started working for the radio, and I'm like, and they'd say, I thought I couldn't touch it, and then they'd say, no, we can't. You can't say it like this. We can't use it like this, And I'm like, but that's my best part. And they say we can't use it. You have it's 1,600 words. We have to lose like 600 words out of this part. So I put some parts in here that I don't think are so important. And I'm looking at it and going, no, but to understand, you have to you have to know this, and so.
I understand. And do you think the profession of a journalist is valued enough, both, respect-wise and salary-wise?
Probably most journalists would say no to both. I think it is. It's obviously really important because people need to know the truth. We're living in an age where there's so many different ways of putting out information, and so much of it is either bad information or just outright fake information. So in that regard, I think true journalism is probably more important than it ever has been before, because people need to know a lot of times what is really going on. And I don't have to tell you, with the pandemic, this was one of those things too. I mean, there was, 1,000 different stories of what could happen to you, and what would work to keep it away and what wouldn't work to keep it away. And, on and on and on. So it was really important that there was journalists out there who were going to health officials all the time and saying, tell me what, based on what what should people be doing, right now to protect themselves. That's just one example. It's certainly in politics, it's important to know what's going on, so that you're not getting cheated by your local government or the government or whoever. So it is very important. Now, do you get enough money for doing that? Again, this is tough. I think almost everyone that does journalism does it because it's just something they like to do. I imagine there are some journalists that are making, if you're on TV, yeah, sure, an anchor person or something like that. But if you're one of the people that goes out to cover press conferences and things like that, then you probably don't get a huge amount of money. But eventually you'll get to write, chances are you'll get to write about stuff that you really like to write about. And you'll be known for writing about that. So people will seek you out, if they're looking for more information, or if they think the story has to be covered just right, it's too complicated for anyone else to understand, whatever, they go, we want that person right there to go and cover the story, and that's a good feeling. And and you get to see a lot of things and meet a lot of people. So when I think about, all the people that I ran into at the radio, heads of state, ambassadors, people like that I just never would have met, otherwise, or seen if I hadn't been working, as a journalist. So you do get that, and you're really, it's good to be informed too. I suppose that's one thing. Most of your friends would understand that, if something's going on in the world or in your country, if that's what you cover or something like that, that you probably know better than them what's happening out there. And so they're like, what do you think about that? Tell me why did, and stuff. So.
And do you have any particular piece of advice for an upcoming young journalist or upcoming young journalists in general? Something that maybe helps you in your...
Write as much as possible. The more you write, the better. And don't turn down anything, even if it sounds horrible. I wrote about a lot of stuff that didn't sound good when they pitched it to me. They said, we need a paper on this, and I was like, why are you looking at me? I don't want to do this. So just take whatever they get. The experience is what's important, especially at the start. And if you have to write a couple thousand words a day, you can just be have some consolation that 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you won't be writing that many words a day, and you will be working on longer articles where they're like, we want take 2 weeks, take 3 weeks, give me a big report on this topic, and so it's satisfying, and at the same time, like I said, it gives you a certain expertise and knowledge that other people don't have.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm glad to help.